Hello everyone, Darius from Self-Archeology here. In this video, I want to talk about empathy. More specifically, about empathy towards children versus caregivers. So the question is, should you empathize with the child or the caregiver first? And I want to say firstly that in some situations, you don't have to choose. You can empathize with both. But there are situations where you have to choose a side. For instance, in my work, I concentrate on childhood trauma, on how childhood experiences shape us into who we are as adults. And to understand how we develop, the problems that we have as adults, you have to empathize with the child first. Moreover, I would argue that empathizing with the child first is not only effective, but also morally right. Because the child didn't choose to be born. The caregiver, the parent, decided to have a child. The child didn't decide to be in that person's care. So the parent, by definition of being a parent, is responsible to take care of the child's needs. The child is not responsible for the parent, obviously. I say obviously, but for some people it's not even obvious. So let me repeat. The parent, the caregiver, whoever is in charge of the child, is responsible for meeting the child's needs. The child is not responsible for the parent, for anybody, actually. So the parent has to correctly identify first the need of the child and then meet that need of the child. If they fail, then the child experiences unpleasant emotions, unpleasant experiences, and oftentimes those experiences create certain negative effects. For the child, oftentimes it lingers into the person's adulthood. When you're an adult and you're trying to resolve your childhood experiences, your past traumas, your past hurts, you need to access those feelings that were repressed when you were a child. Because when you're a child, oftentimes you're not allowed to feel all those feelings. For example, anger. If the caregiver doesn't meet your need, you might be very upset and angry as a child. But then the caregiver and our society in general might say, no, you have no right to feel angry because you're a child. And the parent, the caregiver, always is right. Your feelings are not that important. You're just a child. What do you know? So to empathize with those emotions in yourself, you have to feel empathy. To empathize, you have to feel empathy. To understand those emotions, you have to feel empathy. To resolve those emotions, you have to feel empathy. To feel empathy, you have to realize that as a child, you have the right to feel however you feel because you didn't choose to be there. You can't find a different caregiver. You can't find a different environment. You're stuck here. Your caregiver is responsible for meeting your needs, and they're responsible for you feeling hurt. So when you're healing, you have to recognize that, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. They start to explore their painful feelings, and then they come up with some justifications that they've heard before, that other people told them, that they have internalized. that, for example, the caregiver did the best they could, or they themselves were traumatized and therefore they just replicated what they knew, which all of it is true, but it doesn't change the fact that the child's needs weren't met and that the caregiver is responsible for that. The child doesn't care about the socioeconomic situation of the caregiver. They don't care that the caregiver doesn't have enough time or money or energy to take care of the child in that moment. That's why it's so important as a parent to be ready to be a parent, to have enough resources, to be ready to meet the child's needs, to be trauma informed, to understand human development, to understand how a child develops into an adult, how much responsibility a parent carries, and so on. So in your healing process, it is vital to empathize with yourself as a child. Without that, you can't resolve your trauma. It's impossible. That's why most people don't resolve their traumas, or do it on a very superficial level, or come up with some band-aids, like, I don't know, not even exploring your childhood feelings, but just going into solutions, quote unquote solutions. How can I be more efficient? How can I be happier in my work or whatever? It doesn't resolve the core problem. So you need to empathize with the child first in your healing process. 2, it is morally just and necessary to empathize with the child first. If you have to choose between empathizing with the child or empathizing with the adult, again, there are situations where you can empathize with the parent, with the caregiver. For example, a lot of people contact me for coaching, for therapy, for advice, who are parents. I don't tell them that they're bad parents. I don't think they're bad parents necessarily. I don't tell them that, oh, you're so neglectful, you're a bad person. Why would I do that? I try to empathize with the person, to understand their situation and to help them be better parents. So you can do that in 2 ways in my situation, in my position. I empathize with the person in the moment. So if they say that, I don't know, I just got fired from my job, I have this child to take care of, and I don't know what to do, or they're fighting with their spouse or something else is going on, I try to empathize with the person in front of me. Not to enable them, not to pander to them, but to empathize, to understand how they feel. And then the second part is, it's separated from this, but I can help a parent empathize with themselves as a child. And I would argue the best way to be a better parent is to resolve your own trauma. And to resolve your own trauma, you have to empathize with yourself as a child. So if they understand themselves better, why they are not meeting their child's needs sometimes, more likely than not, because they themselves, when they were children, suffered from other people not meeting their needs. So they didn't learn how to meet their child's needs. So by resolving that, they can become better parents. Because that's painful. Nobody wants to hear that maybe they're bad parents, or that maybe their parents weren't good parents. So they come up with a lot of justifications. One of them is to dismiss the person, to say that, no, this is not right. This is bullshit. I'm a great parent. I have no trauma. My parents didn't traumatize me at all. I have resolved everything. I don't have anything to resolve. My childhood was great. This theory is just bullshit. Also, I have a hard life. I take care of my child the best that I can. and here's this dickhead telling me that I'm a bad parent. Fuck this shit. I'm not gonna listen. I'm gonna dislike this video. I'm gonna unfollow this page. I'm gonna say that Alice Miller or Daniel Mackler or Gabor Mate don't understand anything about trauma. What is trauma? There's no trauma. There's no emotional abuse. Everyone's responsible for themselves, so tough shit. You had a bad childhood, whatever. Just be an adult. Take care of yourself, whatever. Why are you complaining? Dismissing everything that the person before that said and creating a straw man that consists of arguments that nobody argued for. For example, that you shouldn't take care of yourself as an adult. As if you recognize trauma, you automatically wait for somebody to take care of you. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes people kind of get stuck in the child state, so they access their painful emotions and then they get stuck there and can't move forward, or they're so helpless. It's called learned helplessness, where you feel so helpless that you can't function in life. You feel that you need somebody to take care of you. And some people feel that way, but in general, I've never argued, I've never heard people like Gabor Mate or Daniel Mackler or Alice Miller argue that you blame the parent and then you just sit there and do nothing, and you're not responsible for your life somehow. So these are just a few justifications that I've heard over the years. It's very boring to me. I've heard this so many times. But for some people who hear it for the first time, that might be very upsetting. So I'm just briefly addressing this in this video, why it might stop some people empathizing with the child. And not empathizing with the child has severe consequences for our society. I talked about it in my previous videos, so I'm not going to expand here anymore. So just to summarize, in order to heal, you have to empathize with yourself as a child. In a scenario, in a situation where you have to choose whether to empathize with the child or the caregiver, the most efficient way, more often than not, is to empathize with the child, because the child is dependent on the parent. There's power disparity. The child did nothing wrong, the parent did something wrong. Therefore, you empathize with the child, you comfort the child, you validate the child. In some situations, it's more efficient. It's not necessarily more morally right to empathize with the parent. It's not necessarily morally wrong to empathize with the parent, but sometimes you can empathize with both. Sometimes you can empathize with the parent first in order to help them take care of the child better. But overall, if you have child's needs versus adult's needs, child's needs morally come first. It doesn't mean that they're always functionally first, because if a parent really needs to go to the bathroom and the child is crying and the parent just can't hold it in, they have to go. They just have to go. Some issues are immediate. You have to solve them immediately and then go back and take care of the child as soon as possible. But that's not what people talk about when they talk about child's needs versus parents' needs. They try to justify why it is justifiable not to take care of the child or ignore the child, neglect the child. They don't say it that way, but that's what it means. If you don't meet the child's needs, then you're kind of neglecting the child in that moment. It doesn't mean that you're a bad or neglectful parent as a whole, but in that situation, that's what's going on. So, child's needs first, parents' needs second. In your own healing process, you empathize with your child self first, because if you don't, then you will get stuck and you will empathize with the people that caused you harm, caused you pain, and this will stunt your healing process. So even there, it's necessary to empathize with the child first. If somebody else comes and tells you their hurtful stories, you don't empathize with the abuser, even though you might somehow sympathize with the abuser. Maybe you're a parent and you did something that this person is telling you about that they experienced, and you feel that maybe you have to somehow justify their parents' behavior because maybe you did a similar thing with your child. This is not good. This is not helpful. Try to empathize with the person first. Try to validate them first. All of that leads to better outcomes. So I'll stop it here. I think it's enough for this video. I'll talk about it more in the future. If you liked this video, if you found it useful, if you found it interesting, please like it. I know it's annoying when people say that, when YouTubers say that, but it actually helps the algorithm and helps more people find the video. So click like not only on Facebook where I share this video, but also on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel to see more videos, to see them first. If you really like my work, consider becoming a Patreon on patreon.com/self-archeology. Share my work if you can. If not, have a nice day and see you in the future. Bye.